The pounding came hard and fast, fists slamming my door while the wind howled like it wanted in too. "Heat's gone!" someone screamed. "Everything's dead." I cracked the door an inch. Warm air spilled into the blizzard, and every face on my porch locked onto it. Across the street, houses sat dark and frozen, windows glazed white pipes already crying behind the walls. Then she stepped forward, the HOA president, red coat dusted with snow, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "You did this," she shouted. "Turn it back on. Now." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't open the door. I just watched my neighbors huddle in blankets while her authority evaporated in the cold. "You're holding the neighborhood hostage," she snapped. "No," I said quietly. "You cut my back up first." Her expression cracked for half a second, just long enough for fear to show. And that's when she realized Winter wasn't asking her permission anymore. Veronica Sloane didn't knock. She never did. She stepped onto my property like it already belonged to her and announced HOA emergency inspection, as if saying the words made them law. She was the HOA president, self-appointed safety czar of the subdivision, always dressed too clean for bad weather, always carrying that clipboard like a badge. The kind of woman who believed authority wasn't granted, it was taken one homeowner at a time. "This fuel setup violates community safety standards," she said, already gesturing toward my fence without waiting for permission. "We're documenting it." "You're standing on private property," I replied, "and everything behind that fence is fully permitted." She smiled the way people do when they're done listening. HOA bylaws override individual preferences in emergencies. That was her favorite word, emergency. She used it to justify anything she wanted done fast and without consent. New rules, surprise inspections, fines that appeared overnight with deadlines designed to scare people into compliance. 2 board members lingered behind her, uncomfortable boots shifting on the ice. They knew she was pushing past the line. They always did. But Veronica made dissent expensive and silence cheap. "What's the real problem?" I asked. She glanced back at the street, identical houses, identical heat vents, identical dependents, then back at me. "You don't get to operate outside the system," she said, "especially not during winter." That's when I understood. This wasn't about safety. It was about control and the fact that I didn't need hers. The violation notice landed in my inbox before the fuel truck even reached the main road. No greeting, no explanation, just a subject line screaming in all caps, "Unauthorized hazardous storage, immediate action required." Attached was a PDF stamped with the HOA seal, formatted to look official enough to scare anyone who didn't know better. Veronica Sloane's name sat at the bottom like a signature carved into stone. She accused me of storing industrial-grade fuel without approval, claimed it threatened neighborhood safety, and demanded removal pending board review. No statute cited, no ordinance number, just authority by assertion. I didn't argue. I replied once short, precise, professional. County permits attached. Inspection certificates. Photos showing the fenced installation and setback distances. Everything compliant down to the last checkbox. 5 minutes later, her response hit. "We will conduct an on-site inspection at the board's convenience." Not a question. A declaration. The next morning I caught her before she could catch me. I stepped onto my porch just as she reached my fence line, phone already raised, camera clicking through the slats like she was collecting evidence for a crime she'd already decided existed. "You're trespassing," I said. She lowered the phone slowly, eyes sharp, smile practiced. "HOA bylaws grant inspection authority over exterior elements impacting community safety. That authority stops at my property line." Behind her, 2 neighbors pretended to check their mail, curiosity, thinly disguised as routine. Veronica wrote something on her clipboard, nodding to herself, as if I'd just confirmed what she wanted. "Non-compliance carries daily penalties," she said lightly. "Fines escalate quickly. Liens aren't far behind. I'm in full compliance." She finally looked up at me, really looked, and her smile tightened. "We'll see." She turned and walked away, boots crunching on the icy sidewalk, already drafting the next threat in her head. Standing there in the cold watching her go, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about safety. It was about seeing how much pressure it would take before I folded. The paper letter arrived 3 days later, heavier than it needed to be, printed on thick stock, with the HOA crest embossed at the top like a warning stamp. This one had numbers. 30 days to remove the system. $1,800 per day in fines after the deadline. Automatic escalation. Notice of lien review if non-compliance persisted. The language was careful, legal-sounding, designed to scare without actually citing anything real. I sat at the kitchen table and read it twice, then a third time slower. Still no ordinance, still no statute, just repetition, authority by volume. That afternoon, the emails started. One from the HOA management company, one from the board's generic address, one from Veronica herself marked urgent, reminding me that winter emergencies require cooperation. I answered once more, attaching the same permits and inspection records, plus a highlighted excerpt from the HOA bylaws, stating board members were prohibited from entering private property without consent or a court order. I kept it polite, factual, cold, no reply. Instead, the neighborhood alert went out. Important community notice due to upcoming severe weather. Residents are strongly discouraged from maintaining individual fuel or heating redundancies. For safety and coordination, all emergency resources will be managed centrally by the HOA. I stared at the screen, anger tightening behind my ribs. That evening I watched from my window as a fuel truck pulled into the clubhouse lot instead of my driveway. Veronica stood there in her red coat, directing the driver, gesturing sharply toward the storage shed behind the building. They weren't worried about safety. They were stockpiling control. If the storm hit hard, and it would, she wanted every homeowner dependent on the HOA's permission to stay warm. No alternatives. No independence. That's when the conflict stopped being personal. This wasn't just about my system anymore. It was about who decided who froze first. The first sign something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It was hesitation. The furnace kicked on, then stalled. The familiar low hum stretched too long before settling. An hour later it happened again, pilot struggling, pressure slow to build. I checked the gauges at the tanks. Full. Normal. No alarms. By nightfall the temperature dropped faster than forecast. Wind slammed the siding hard enough to rattle the studs. I pulled on my coat and stepped outside with a flashlight breath, turning to frost instantly. The beam caught it immediately. The supply line near the tank had been twisted metal, torqued just enough to deform the coupling. Fuel residue had leaked and frozen into a dark, glassy stain across the snow. Clean break. No gnaw marks. No storm damage. Someone had done this by hand. I stood there longer than I should have, the cold biting through my gloves, while anger finally pushed past discipline. This wasn't an HOA letter. This wasn't a fine. This was sabotage. Inside, I pulled the security footage. At 2:01 a.m., a bundled figure approached along the fence line. Slow, deliberate, no rush. The scarf gave her away immediately, long, dramatic, wrapped twice around her neck. Veronica didn't even bother hiding her face from the camera. She bent, worked the coupling, then walked off like she'd taken out the trash. I exported the clip. Screenshots, timestamps, still frames. I sent everything to the board, the management company, and the police non-emergency line. No commentary, just facts, Veronica replied an hour later. This footage is inconclusive, she wrote. Weather distortion and shadows make identification impossible. Your system remains a documented violation. That was when the last illusion cracked. She wasn't trying to make me comply anymore. She was trying to remove my ability to survive the storm independently, so when the cold hit, I'd have no choice but to come to her. And suddenly, the fuel truck at the clubhouse made sense. She wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was positioning herself as the only source of heat left standing. I didn't call a lawyer first. I called the county. Years in uniform teach you one thing fast. When systems start lying to protect themselves, you go to the records, not the people shouting the loudest. Deeds. Utility maps. Original infrastructure filings. Paper that didn't care who Veronica thought she was. By morning, I had them spread across my kitchen table survey plats, from the development's first phase, faded utility overlays, and a construction addendum most homeowners never bothered to read. That's when I saw it clearly. The emergency shutoff valve for the main gas line, the one feeding every house past my lot, sat inside my deed boundary. Not on an easement, not reassigned, forgotten when the system went automated years ago, but still functional, still legally mine. I called the county utilities office and asked for confirmation. 2 hours later, an investigator returned the call. "You're correct," she said carefully. "No recorded easement. That valve is private." I forwarded her the sabotage footage. The permits, the HOA letters, the fine schedule threatening liens. She went quiet for a moment. "We'll be documenting this," she said, "especially the citation. The ordinance number reference doesn't exist." That explained the confidence. Veronica hadn't misread the rules, she'd invented them. The HOA's response came before the county could even arrive. A neighborhood-wide email sent from Veronica's personal account. Due to deliberate interference by a homeowner restricting access to critical infrastructure, the HOA is exploring emergency legal remedies. She was rewriting the story in real time, painting herself as the protector and me as the threat. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the confirmation email from the county, clipped it to the top of my folder, and added one more note to the police report: confirmed vandalism, identified suspect. Outside, the sky had turned the color of steel. Snow started falling in thick, heavy sheets. The forecast had just updated. The storm was arriving early. And now, I knew something Veronica didn't. When it hit, the only working leverage left in this neighborhood sat on my land, and she'd already burned every bridge that might have convinced me to use it gently. The storm didn't announce itself. It just arrived, heavy snow, driven sideways by wind that felt sharp enough to cut skin. Within hours, the roads glazed over. Power flickered. Cell service thinned to a single bar that came and went with each gust. By dusk, the temperature dropped past zero. I walked the perimeter one last time, checking locks, generator, load battery reserves. Everything on my side was steady, quiet, ready. The neighborhood, though, was already unraveling. Porch lights blinked out one by one. I watched a family down the street load blankets into their SUV and start the engine exhaust billowing like smoke signals. At 10:41 p.m., my phone buzzed. Urgent OA alert, widespread heating disruptions reported. Residents are advised to rely on HOA coordinated emergency resources until further notice. I laughed once, short, humorless. The clubhouse generator sputtered, then died an hour later. Whatever fuel Veronica had hoarded wasn't enough for real cold. That's when I put on my coat. Snow had drifted halfway up the valve enclosure by the side yard. I brushed it clear breath, coming fast headlamp, slicing through the white. The old wheel resisted at first, metal stiff from years of neglect, but then it turned with a deep grinding groan. Quarter turn, then another. Downstream pressure began to bleed off. I locked the box, snapped time-stamped photos, and walked back inside without looking behind me. The first knock came at 4:03 a.m. By the time I reached the door, fists were already pounding hard enough to shake the frame. "You need to open this door," Veronica screamed through the storm. The whole street just lost heat. I left the door closed and spoke through it. "You dismissed my sabotage report. You threatened liens. You told the neighborhood to depend on you." Her voice cracked. "This is bigger than you and me. You made it bigger." Silence stretched, broken only by the wind and the distant sound of something bursting under pressure. "This is criminal," she hissed. "The valve is on my land," I said calmly. "And I warned you what winter does to arrogance." She stood there, shivering, snow collecting on her shoulders, finally understanding the position she'd forced herself into. Behind her, the neighborhood was already freezing, and for the first time since this started, she had nothing left to threaten me with. By morning, the street had turned into a frozen holding pen. Neighbors stood in clusters, wrapped in blankets and ski jackets, stamping their feet to keep blood moving. Cars idled in driveways. Steam rose from a few ruptured ceilings where pipes had finally surrendered. The storm had eased, but the cold hadn't. Veronica called the emergency meeting herself, right there in the street, as if proximity to the damage would restore her authority. This situation was caused by a reckless homeowner, she announced, voice sharp, projecting like she still had a room to command. Someone decided to weaponize infrastructure during a weather emergency. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some faces turned toward me. Others looked away, unsure who to believe. I didn't speak. Then the sound cut through everything, tires crunching over ice. A county SUV rolled to a stop behind the crowd, hazard lights flashing. Another followed. Doors opened. A utilities investigator stepped out, clipboard tucked under her arm, a deputy right behind her. Veronica froze mid-sentence. "Which one of you is the HOA president?" the investigator asked. The wind carried the silence that followed, and for the first time, Veronica wasn't in control of the room anymore. I stepped forward before Veronica could recover. No speech, no build-up. I handed the investigator a single folder, thin, deliberate, deed map on top. The red boundary line stopped exactly where the valve box sat. "This shows the emergency shutoff is on my property," the investigator said after a quick scan. "No easement recorded." Veronica opened her mouth, closed it. I flipped to the next page, still frames from the security footage, time-stamped, clear, her scarf, her posture, her hands on the coupling. "And this," I said evenly, "is the sabotage I reported. The HOA dismissed it." The investigator turned to Veronica. "You issued a citation under Ordinance 14B. Veronica nodded too fast. "Yes, for community safety." The investigator shook her head. "That ordinance doesn't exist." We checked. A low sound rolled through the crowd, not anger yet, not relief. Recognition. The deputy stepped closer. "Ma'am, did you enter this homeowner's property after midnight on the night in question?" Veronica's voice wavered. "I was trying to prevent a bigger emergency." Silence snapped tight. She'd said the wrong thing, and everyone heard it. Veronica's confidence collapsed in real time. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly, hands lifting as if she could rewind the sentence. "I was acting in the community's best interest. Someone had to." The investigator didn't argue. She just turned to the deputy and nodded once. "Ma'am," the deputy said, voice flat, "you've admitted to entering private property and interfering with a permitted utility system. That's not HOA enforcement. That's vandalism." Veronica's head snapped toward the board members. "You're not going to let them do this, are you?" No one stepped forward. Greg stared at the ground. Another board member shook his head slowly, like he was finally seeing her clearly for the first time. "We're voting," Greg said hoarsely. "Right now." Hands went up, one after another. Unanimous. Veronica's shoulders sagged. The clipboard slipped from her fingers and hit the ice with a hollow crack. The investigator turned to me. "You're within your rights to keep the valve closed." I looked at the crowd at neighbors shivering, watching the last illusion of control fall apart. "I'm reopening it," I said. Once. I walked to the valve box, brushed away the snow, and turned the wheel back. Somewhere beneath our feet, pressure returned. And right there, in the cold in front of everyone, she'd tried to command Veronica, lost everything she'd used to threaten us. No one cheered. Not really. The moment the line came back, the crowd just exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for days. A few people sagged against car hoods. Someone laughed once, shaky, half hysterical, because relief can sound like that when your hands are numb and your ceiling almost fell in. Neighbors started talking all at once, but not to argue anymore. To confess, I got fined for a generator last year. She made me take down my storm shutters. I reported her threats, and the board told me to stop stirring trouble. Even Greg didn't look like the president of anything. He looked like a man who'd finally swallowed the truth, and it tasted like ice. Mr. Lindell shuffled up beside me, eyes wet from wind and emotion. "You didn't just save heat," he muttered. "You saved this neighborhood from her." I kept my hands in my pockets, shoulders still tight. "I didn't do this to be thanked," I said. Across the street, Veronica stood near the deputy, silent, now face blank, like she'd never learned what to do without control. And for the first time since I moved here, the street felt lighter. The county investigator put her phone on speaker and read directly from the email that had just landed. "Effective immediately, the HOA's enforcement authority is suspended, pending a full audit," she said. "All citations issued under fabricated or misapplied ordinances are void." A murmur swept through the crowd, this time sharper, steadier. She continued. "Preliminary damage assessments from burst pipes, structural failures, and emergency displacement are estimated in the low seven figures. Responsibility will be apportioned to parties found to have acted outside their legal authority." Veronica flinched. The investigator looked up. "That includes restitution for vandalized private systems." I felt a quiet click inside my chest. Not satisfaction. Closure. The deputy added, "Miss Sloane is being referred to the district attorney for trespass and utility interference. Further instructions will be issued in writing." Greg cleared his throat, voice barely carrying. "The board withdraws all actions against Mr. Hayes. Effective now." No applause. Just understanding, settling in. The investigator finished with one last line. "Going forward, no property reclassification or emergency override may occur without homeowner consent, third-party verification, and a recorded community vote." It wasn't dramatic, but it was permanent. No one rushed off when it was over. People lingered in the street closer, now talking in low voices that weren't panicked anymore, just tired, honest. Someone handed around a thermos. Another neighbor wrapped a blanket around an older woman's shoulders without being asked. The cold was still there, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It felt handled. Across the block, the clubhouse lights stayed dark. By afternoon, a yellow notice was taped to the door. Structure condemned, pipes ruptured beyond repair, generator flooded, fuel improperly stored. The one place Veronica had tried to turn into her throne was the first thing officially shut down. Greg approached me once more, hands empty this time. "We're dissolving the board," he said. "Rebuilding from scratch. Voluntary. Transparent. No more punishment disguised as order." I nodded. That was enough. Before everyone dispersed, I walked back to the valve box one last time. Snow clung to the edges, already beginning to melt. I checked the lock, then closed it gently, not as a threat, not as leverage, just as a reminder. When I turned back, neighbors were already heading home, heat returning, lights coming back on one by one down the street. Winter hadn't broken us. It had stripped away the lies and left only one truth standing. Preparation isn't defiance, and control doesn't make a community, accountability does.